going to go ahead and start panel 2A right here, talking about taking a bite, data journalism in the era of big information. I'm going to hand it off to Henry, who's going to introduce the panels for this really, really interesting workshop that I think everyone is really big into data. So, Henry, take it away.
Hi, folks. Thank you for coming today. I know there's choice, and I'm glad you've chosen data journalism.
Thank you for flying United.
I sounded like a flight attendant or something. So I have three great guests with me today from all over they've come from all over today to be here. Eric Ulken is I'm sorry if I mangle up the pronunciations today, I'll try my best. Eric Ulken is the Assistant Managing Editor at the Seattle Times for Data, and you previously worked as the Interactive Technology at the LA Times, I think that's correct?
Yeah, Assistant Managing Editor for Digital, so data, unfortunately, is only a little tiny bit of what I do. I'd love for it to be all of what I do.
A lot of you will know Paul Cheung. He's the AAJA. I'm going to call you the global president because national, I think, is selling you a bit short. And, he's AP's global interactive editor, and you're based in New York.
Yes.
And Irene Jay Liu, and you are the news editor for data at Reuters, and you've recently launched Connected China, which I think a lot of people will have been aware of. You may have noticed I have another guest here. This is Tony Yu. He's a fellow data journalist at the JMSC, and he's helping run the gear today. I'm holding two microphones because we're trying something new. This is something that I've never seen before, and it's live data journalism.
Hey, Henry, hold into the mics for the live stream.
Sure. Okay. Is this hello? Hello. Yeah. Okay. So what we're doing with these two mics is we have voice recognition, and it's feeding straight into visualizations behind us. As you can see, the accuracy is not that great. I don't think I ever said release to mics, but so I know it's a bit awkward, but you're going to see the guests speaking into both microphones at once. So without further ado, I will let the guests introduce themselves one by one and use your Twitter handles as well if possible. So Paul, do you want to go first? Just
okay.
Passing the microphone along.
So I'm P. Cheung, Cheung 630. So I'm the Global Interactive Editor for the AP. A lot of people ask what I do. Primarily go to a lot of meetings and answer a lot of emails. But at the same time, we do a lot of creative work at the AP, where we do everything from Syria to U.S. elections to to some blockbuster movies. Data's kind of surround us everywhere, big and small. So it's part of our team to make sense of it and to be able to tell stories about it. And prior to the AP, I was at the Miami Herald. I was their deputy presentation editor, where I helped them redesign MiamiHerald.com back in 2009. And then prior to that, I was at the Wall Street Journal for 8 years as their senior graphics editor.
Irene?
Hi, everyone. My name is Irene Liu. I am currently the news editor for data at Reuters. I've been in the job for about not quite 2 years, and I was brought on to actually develop Connected China and lead that project based out of Hong Kong. Prior to that, I teach a data journalism class at HKU, so I see a few of my students in the class, actually current and former students, which is kind of cool. And back in the day, 3 years ago, when I first started teaching that class, it was called computer-assisted reporting. That is no longer the trendy buzzword, apparently. 2 years ago, they asked me whether they could change the name to data journalism because that's way sexier, apparently. And so I said, sure, whatever, it's fine. It's pretty much the same course, although actually it's changed a lot. A bit of background. I was a political reporter trained to do radio and print, and I, back in the day when I was in New York, I was a lead blogger, I did a television show, I filed for radio. So I kind of came into journalism, as you guys are, at a time when you really had to be able to do all different kinds of mediums. Data journalism is obviously something that is very, very powerful and sexy, and if you can find a way to put it into your job title or your job description or your background, you will always have a job. So it's good that you guys are here. Anyway, I look forward to hearing from the other panelists.
Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. I'm Eric Ulken, and I feel like I'm talking to you in stereo here. And I have to just say, wow, Henry, this is really cool. It seems to be working. And I've never seen a live data visualization like this before, so well done. I am the assistant managing editor for digital at the Seattle Times, which means that, as I said, I don't really actually get to do a whole lot of data work. I spend also most of my time in meetings and writing emails. But prior to this, I worked at the LA Times, where I had the good fortune of working with some really talented data journalists and kind of leading the effort to build what we call the data desk, which was a sort of a multidisciplinary union of graphics people, computer-assisted reporting folks. I mean, the funny thing about that term, computer-assisted reporting, and it's a discipline that's been around in American newspapers primarily, but other organizations as well for many years, is that today, like all reporting is computer assisted, right? To some degree or another. But to bring folks from those different disciplines together, along with digital people, producers, and developers, to not only collect and analyze data, but also present it. So I'm doing a little bit of that and helping sort of assemble a group that's doing some of that at the Seattle Times as well. So I think it's going to be an interesting discussion. Looking forward to it.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm going to start you guys off with a really, really easy question. What is a data journalist? Irene, why don't you start?
This is the most awkward positioning here. Holding two mics, it feels very old school. And they're not even cordless. Anyway, I would say that data journalism is what everyone should be now. I mean, you cannot get away with being a reporter and not understanding how to get information from the internet, from data sources, from open government. You just can't. It's actually not excusable. You will not be able to function as a journalist in the future unless you know how to do that and to be numerate. I know journalists generally are not usually very comfortable. They didn't like math that much most of the time, but you have to be comfortable with that in some way. If you're a programmer, even better. You'll definitely be more likely to get a job in the future. But understanding how that works is something that everyone needs to have now, those skills.
Now, Eric, you work for a relatively, I say relatively compared to Hong Kong, it's gigantic, but relatively small paper in the US. What is a data journalist to you?
Well, I think a data journalist, to some degree, is a union of disciplines. It's very difficult, frankly, to have all of the various skills that we sort of rely on and think of in the realm of data journalism in one person. So to me, it often involves sort of bringing people together who have disparate expertise. But I think it is possible, and especially now as tools are becoming easier to use, more accessible to people who are not programmers, for anybody to be, in a sense, a data journalist. So as the tools become more accessible, I think we'll see this sort of democratization of data journalism.
Paul, perhaps you can talk about sort of you work for a huge newsroom. What do you look for in a data journalist?
I think a data journalist is a good journalist, and I want to demystify data a little bit, because I think when people have the word data attached to it, you kind of have this perception of what it is. When in fact, what is data? I think a data journalist is a journalist who could understand trends and be able to look at the number and understand, making the point of comparison. What's missing? What is it telling you? So it's no different than you doing a regular story, whether you're broadcast or print, really following up the trends and looking at some of the missing threads, except that a lot of data journalists do it with numbers. So think about data as another form of language. So you just basically have to be multilingual these days, and data is just this new language that you have to learn, like Chinese or Japanese or social media.
Okay. You talk about data journalism being sexy. That's great for us as programmers, but is it an essential part of every newsroom now? And what does it contribute to the newsroom? Perhaps I'll start with you again.
Well, I would say that it's in everything that we do. I mean, can you imagine a newsroom that doesn't look through budgets or cover polls or conduct surveys? I mean, you can't escape it. Before, if you were marginally numerate, you'd end up doing all of those kinds of number stories. But now, as more data is available online, and we can actually challenge information using our own analysis. We don't have to rely on the government saying, well, we have a surplus of 3%. We can actually look at the raw numbers and say, well, actually, you are misrepresenting your analysis, or you're, twisting your analysis to, find the line that you want. And I think that in general, it's part of what we do now, and you really can't escape it. And the truth is that companies are using big data to make huge profits. Governments, institutions, companies are using numbers to serve their agenda. And we really, if we want to stay relevant, especially given the environment where citizens are committing journalistic acts every single day and have a platform online to be able to publish their work, we have to differentiate ourselves, and that's really by maintaining our integrity, increasing our skill sets, and as a newsroom and as individuals, and really kind of going from there.
Eric, perhaps you can answer that question, but also
Sure.
talk about how it helps the Seattle Times differentiate itself from other Seattle papers and West Coast papers.
Well, first, I think data journalism really feeds into the mission of journalism to demystify things for people, to help people understand the increasingly complex world around them. We have, I think, a bit of a responsibility to help interpret these kinds of information. I'd also say that you know the jokes, right, about journalists doing math, and you get a bunch of journalists around a table at a restaurant, and nobody can split up the bill because we don't know, we can't do simple.
You want to tell a joke to the...
No, it's all right. But well, actually, I will tell one. Is that you know how journalists count? 1, 2, trend.
Oh, I thought that was just the New York Times. I didn't realize that was journalists in general.
Yeah, well, so it's a bad journalism.
Is there anyone here from the New York Times?
All right, I'm going to stop with the jokes. It's clearly not my area of expertise. This is a tough crowd too. So really, though, I think that we, as journalists, have to get, smart about interpreting numbers, interpreting not just numbers, but interpreting data as in all of its many forms, in order to sort of help do our jobs to inform people. A lot of stories are buried in these in statistics, in reports from both government data that we collect on our own, data that we get from third parties, from corporations. There's a lot of really, really good stories in there, and I think it's an imperative these days. At the Seattle Times, like in many American newspapers in particular, news organizations more generally, we've had the sort of the computer-assisted reporting team for some time, and I think they have always been a really important part of the investigative sort of arm of the newsroom. Today, though, what's to me is very exciting about the work that we're doing in data journalism is that we're able to take computer-assisted reporting out of the corner of the newsroom where it's been sitting for a couple of decades probably, and pull it really into the center and make it a really important part of the news gathering operation. And I will show you when we do the demo sort of a live example of that.
So, Paul, I know this is your job, but how important do you think your role is within your organization?
Well, if I'm doing my job, hopefully my role wouldn't be important, because I think data need to be in everyone's ethos. And again, just really looking at data journalism and say, what is it that we're doing? And what data journalism will allow you to do is find unlikely stories that you would never once imagine before. And again, by crossing not just one set of data, but multiple data, two unlikely set of data could yield, a very different imagination. So I think, this is a great time to be a journalist, because not only do you have all the existing tools that you have, but you have these deep data and transparency and information just everywhere. You could just basically even create your own personal data and do a little bit of crowdsourcing. And that could tell some kind of trend and say, how's that compared to another group? So again, I think it needs to be in our ethos. And if I'm doing my job, then one day we wouldn't need a data editor or an interactive editor because everything we do is interactive and data.
One last question, just on sort of a high level. Do you think the public are aware of what you guys are doing with interactive, or is it just sort of just appeared on their web browsers and they just start using it? Have they seen a change when it started?
Sure. We talk a little bit about sort of information literacy and the extent to which our audience is comfortable with what we're presenting to them. I have a feeling, and I don't have any hard data to back this up, but I have a feeling that there's a greater understanding and acceptance in digital of means of data visualization and data sort of simple means of data visualization, data analysis among the general sort of usership. But I think we do have to be careful to make data simple. I mean, not to oversimplify. Of course, there's a danger in that too. But it's important that we give people something that they know how to use. Otherwise, we're just adding to the mystification.
Irene, when you were building Connected China, how did you make sure that it was easy to interact with?
To be very honest, we actually built Connected China to be sort of on the frontier of kind of this new world of interactive, immersive journalism. We had a very small team, and we kind of operated. We did a little bit of beta testing, but actually we did not do very comprehensive, focus group driven, user experience testing on the thing. And we knew that even the format and the way that we built this was going to require a bit of a learning curve for people to adjust, because what we did was we built an HTML5 site that works on desktop, but also really is optimized for the iPad, so that all those movements, the swipes, the reverse swipes, the pinches and all that would be part of the experience. And so, quite honestly, we kind of, I guess, followed the Steve Jobs route, which is to just say, no, this doesn't exist before, but we're going to just try to see how it goes and kind of push forward in a new way.
Paul, how important is mobile to the AP and other organizations? The iPads, the iPhones?
Well, I think most of the world have a smartphone now, and not necessarily a desktop. So everything we do at the AP, especially interactive, is all responsive. So we actually don't care where you're looking at the information for the interactive, whether it's a desktop, your iPhone or your Android phone or your tablet, because we can't predict, right? So at one point, you used to thinking, okay, there's the standard monitor size, and then you have your iPad, and then you have the iPhone, and bam, what happened? iPad mini. Totally messed up the sizes. iPhone 5, suddenly, you have that extra bit of space. What do? So you can't really anticipate how information is going to transform. You just have to make sure that it's adaptive. And I think one of the biggest challenge with presenting not only data but journalism these days is really understanding the user behavior. We can't expect user to adapt to what we do. We have to adapt where users are. So if you're looking at our information, your latest Samsung refrigerator that has a monitor that displays news, then so be it. Like who am I to tell you that you can't look at news that way? So I think, in terms of the, not so mobile, but I think it's responsive and adaptive to your personal environment is very important. And that's something that I know my team, every single day we think about that. And if you look at some of the AP Interactive, the way we even present the information is very different on a mobile phone to a desktop experience. Because in a mobile, we're not going to overwhelm you with these big data visualization. You might just want something simpler. And I think, to think about how we present information, we have to think about almost like an onion. We have people who don't really want to engage with the data, so you have to really present, here's the big point of view, here's the big trend. And then you kind of have to leave little, breadcrumbs for people to delve deeper into your presentation and your data. So I think be able to anticipate different type of users is really important. And it's not necessarily one size fit all, but within your one set, you have to be able to anticipate high engagement and low engagement.
Irene, do you think that data journalism should be used to tell the story, or so that the users can find out the story for themselves?
That's a big debate, right? Whether or not we put everything out there and let people discover, or whether we develop our own analysis. I would say it's ideal in an ideal world, both. I mean, if people really wanted to get data, they could just make a request, a FOIA request or whatever, or go online and find the data themselves. I think that our value add is that we can treat data as a source. So again, in the same way that you make sure that the person that you're interviewing is not sketchy and not fraudulent, you also have to check the methodology and the source of your data. You have to provide a kind of framework, and also you have to tell a story. I mean, that's one thing that I think is so important. It's not enough to just spit out a bunch of numbers. No one actually, people will just glaze over and move on. What we can do, and the beauty of the kind of innovations in data visualization and all this, is that we can make stories beautiful. We can tell them in different ways, whether it's text, photo, graphics, whatever. And we can engage. And I think that that's something that we have to continue to innovate on, because who would have thought that moving GIFs would be such a kind of powerful tool that is used now kind of for fun and for serious journalism as well. We wouldn't have thought of that 5 years ago, but I think that we just have to make sure that we're on top of it and that we're innovating as well.
All right. I mean, you come from a smaller organization. You don't necessarily have the manpower to create something like Connected China. What can a smaller organization or individuals, what can they do to get started in data journalism?
Well, I'd say the first thing is start collecting data. Start file freedom of information requests. I know that may be more difficult in some places than in others, but find a good data story always begins with the data itself. So being able to sort of acquire it and be able to do some sort of basic analysis on it, whether that's by using spreadsheets. We make really heavy use of Google Spreadsheets, right? It's a pretty simple tool. You can house a lot of data there. You can do some pretty good some pretty basic analysis, but enough to kind of get you started. Even some basic data visualization right within Google Spreadsheets. For those who sort of want to take the next step, Google Fusion Tables, right, is a tool that's quite useful for sort of analyzing, doing pivot tables and that kind of thing on large data sets. So being familiar with a few of the basic tools, I think is really useful. And there's a lot. There's even sort of publishable quality stuff that you can do just with that, just by collecting, analyzing, and doing some basic visualizations on data in those tools. And then for those of you who do work in organizations with an IT department, make friends with people in IT. That's always helpful. I have found that once people sort of understand the objective, there's a lot of buy-in from. I mean, we have some great people at the Seattle Times who are not journalists, who did not sort of start in the come up in that way, very much like yourself, right? Who of course now you can call yourself a journalist, but people who came from other disciplines, right? Who came from a sort of computer science discipline and sort of just found themselves in a newsroom and said, "Hey, this is cool," and I think you can sort of co-opt some of those folks for data projects if you pitch it to them the right way.
Okay. Paul, perhaps you can talk about you talk about data a lot. Finding data is easy. When we were doing a project about immigration, and it was easy to find the immigration stats. But what do you do with the data once you found the sort of raw data? How do you create something from that?
I think a lot of people, it's like chicken and the egg, right? People say, well, I find this data set. What do I do with it? Well, the better question is, what is your point of view? What is it that you want to tell, right? So you have to have your own hypothesis to begin with. And does the data confirm hypotheses, or does it offer the contrary? So again, you can't just say, I found this great spreadsheet and here it is, I discovered Go. That is the wrong assumption. As a journalist, or even, I got my start as, I did a lot of science when I was in college. You always have to have, your original statement. What is it that you try to prove? And does the data help support that documentation or not? And if it doesn't, then why not? So again, you kind of have to apply your journalistic instinct, the basic of journalism, into your data reporting, and not just hope for some magical spreadsheet going to answer, your questions, or this spreadsheet to be able to make your story better. I mean, having a great data set is not going to make your story any better if you can't really, have a point of view or be able to make informed decisions from the data. Just one little example. So when I was at the Wall Street Journal, I did this information graphic on how I try to prove that countries with a high HIV rate actually hurts the overall GDP growth. And it took a really long time to look for data. I called the World Bank. I looked at all these different data sets to try to analyze the information. I couldn't find any. And then what I ended up doing is finding an investment report from Morgan Stanley. They did a study on South Africa and looking at the country and say, okay, if South Africa didn't have a high HIV rate, the GDP growth is actually 2% difference. So you could kind of derive that from one particular study, and then looking at, two different type of data, HIV rate versus GDP, and plot them in, a double variable axis. And that could help you kind of come to some kind of conclusion. So a lot of times the biggest story might just come from a very discrete study, or what I call like the smaller data. And from the smaller data, you kind of forecast, could you make a bigger story out of it? What are the trends? So part of the story that I was illustrating that, at that point is China had a low GDP rate and also a low HIV rate. So that means if I was, an NGO person, or if I was working for World Health Organization, I would monitor the HIV situation in China and India really closely because it could go either way, right? So, based on that study alone, then I could safely say that HIV does have some kind of economic impact because government have to pay more health data. So again, it's just kind of one set of data leading you to a second set of data. But you have to have a point of view from the beginning. I didn't just begin looking for data because I want to.
Irene, since you're teaching here, perhaps you can talk about, students and journalists that haven't been exposed to technology. What can they do to sort of learn the skills, and should they be learning them?
Sure. I think that everyone should be learning them, and though I would be very happy to have more students in my class, I do think that a lot of what you can pick up, you can actually do if you're interested in terms of raw skills, through self-teaching. The beauty of the internet is if you want to learn how to use Google Fusion tables, there are tutorials, there are examples, there are data sets with the end products so that you can actually walk through every step. I personally, I wasn't a math major, I'm not a programmer. I pretty much learned everything I know just by picking it up on my own, and it's not. Don't be intimidated. I think that's the key. And I would say, just in terms of the question before about data, I think that one other area that you should always think about is to treat not every data set as discrete, but also try to make connections because. If we're going down the path of trying to root out corruption and that kind of thing, people count on the fact that you only see things through one set. So for example, if you're only looking at, Hong Kong company registrations and you don't kind of try to make the connections or connect the dots with other data sources, you actually won't get the story. So the key is companies are doing this all the time. They buy up different data sets and then make connections so they can find out more insight. Campaigns do it for voting, and we should do it as journalists as well.
Sounds like we have a backup career if data journalism doesn't work out.
Exactly.
So Eric, in the small newsroom, what do you look for in a regular reporter if you want them to do data journalism? What skills do they need? What sort of particular skills do they need?
Well, first off, I should say I don't hire reporters. I work on the digital sort of presentation team, so I'd have to ask my colleagues. But I think if I channeled them, I think they would say, we're looking for facility with not so much particular tools, but the concepts. the tools are always changing, as we see. Today it's Google Fusion tables. Tomorrow it's something even better and easier to use, I'm sure. But I would say it's probably the ability to think critically about data, to ask questions and know how to find some answers. That's really, I think, the most important part, and that's the kind of thing that you don't have to be a programmer or a math major to learn.
Okay. So what I think we'll do now is we'll do the demos, but perhaps before you demo, each of you can introduce what your sort of, sorry, I know that's twisted around your foot, what stories you've been involved in that you've been most proud of, in terms of data. Perhaps you guys can talk about that while I just get the computer ready. Okay. So I'll start with you.
Okay. Well, I think I'll draw from my experience at the LA Times, where we had really the first data project I was involved in. There was an attempt to chronicle every homicide that took place in LA County, which is a pretty large number, and was the effort of a single reporter who was very determined that nobody should be killed in LA and not be recognized in some way by the paper of record, the LA Times. And so she devoted a year of her career to writing stories on every person. And we took that information and we turned it into a sortable, filterable database and map that really told a story of the sort of the sociological impacts of homicide. And how it affects different groups, different ethnic groups, different age groups differently.
So do you want to do a quick demo?
Yeah, I'm not actually demoing that one, but
okay, that's
although I can.
So then we'll go.
What? Oh, I see.
Can we get the wireless mic?
Yeah.
No, one's not going to work. You have the handheld mic.
Can I just steal yours for a second?
Yeah.
Don't worry. Well, here's what I'm going to do.
Do we have a wireless mic?
I'll intro this really quickly.
Don't worry about that one.
Okay. So this is a project I mentioned that we were doing at the Seattle Times.
I think it's at the bottom. Nope.
Okay.
Hello? Yeah.
I'm just. You have to shout. Okay. Yeah. So I wanted to show a project here that's ripped from the headlines. You may have seen. In fact, let me show you first the homepage of the Seattle Times site. Is this the maximize?
Yeah, it's as big as it goes, I'm afraid.
Okay, that's fine. So you may have heard of this story that happened in Washington State yesterday. A bridge, a rather major highway bridge, collapsed, and one of the I guess it's a theme. I'm going to count like journalists do, 1-2 trend, right? The crumbling infrastructure in the U.S. and in particular bridges. Right after this happened yesterday, a couple of folks on the digital team and our computer assisted reporting editor got together and put together this map and table of structurally deficient bridges in Washington State. So sort of where I'm just going to move this away if I may. So where in Washington State there are bridges that have been classified as structurally deficient.
Are there any bridges that are safe?
That's like all the bridges in Washington State. No, actually, the scary thing about this, and the thing that I think we've actually not done a very good job of, is putting into perspective Washington State in terms of the rest of the U.S. Washington State is actually, in terms of the percentage of bridges that are structurally deficient, is actually one of the better states in the country. there are 143 structurally deficient bridges, and this is a data set from the Department of Transportation that has some basic information on all of them, including the average daily traffic, so you can see which are the bridges that are structurally deficient that are carrying the most people. This is an interstate bridge. This is an example of a sort of a quick and dirty approach to data journalism and data visualization. Clearly, not a case where you'd be able to immediately tell some stories in the data, other than perhaps there's a lot of bridges on this road right here that are in need of repair. But the point, actually, the thing that I'm most proud of in this example is the speed with which we were able to do it. So the story broke yesterday about this time, maybe a little earlier, and within about 18 hours, this database was live online, and that is a result of the fact that we had some folks who had done this very kind of project before, so it was possible to sort of steal code from the previous project and use it for this, and that's one thing that we're really big on, and I think most people who work in this area, code reuse, right? Never build anything that you can only use once. Always think about more general uses for the projects that you do.
So how are you going to drive home when you get back? Which route are you going to take?
I'm going to take the train. That I can show a few other things, but this one I thought was well, really timely. I'll show a couple of examples that use some relatively simple tools. So this was a map that went with a project, a Pulitzer Prize winning project on the toll of use of methadone, which is a very cheap and readily available drug for pain killing, which was on a preferred drug list that the state of Washington would pay for people with the state health insurance plan, and it turns out this drug is particularly dangerous. It's possible to overdose quite easily. And this map was an effort to show that the overdoses that happened as a result of the use of methadone were predominantly in lower income areas, the lighter green areas on the map. And even though there's quite high population density in this part of Seattle, very, very few people died as a result of methadone use in this area because the drug was prescribed primarily to people in lower income groups. So it's this was sort of one sort of avenue into the data that helped tell the story. This was done in Google Fusion tables. Fairly simply, the data were imported and geocoded and plotted on the map, and the shapes of the census tracts were overlaid. Okay. And then I'll mention one other tool that also was used in the methadone project called Tableau. Tableau Public is a freely available data visualization tool. One of the useful things about it is that it doesn't require you to be a programmer, and it's quite user friendly in terms of the interface to building tools. So this was where sort of Washington State stacks up with the rest of the country on the use of methadone. Tableau also enables you to sort of relatively easily embed your data visualization in an interactive way in your website.
Paul, why don't you go next? Because I think Irene needs to plug an iPad in.
Okay.
You want to just introduce the sort of projects you're proud of and then put it through?
So let's see. So basically, over the past year, we have transformed all of our interactive from Flash-based to HTML. So one of the biggest hurdles is how do we present the information across all platforms and all devices. So I'm really proud of my team in terms of making data, again, filtering from a full web width experience down to a very small, tiny phone experience. And we're able to kind of diffuse different data as, in different parts of the interactive. So it's not like we come out with, once a year, here's our big data project. We have data projects almost on a daily level. And one of the things that I'm most proud about is we actually make the data easy for users to understand. So one thing that I want to show is the Great Reset project. So basically, this is a project that we work together with the business department where we try to look at how this particular recession is different than all the other recessions in terms of job recovery. So we're looking at all sorts of different data, and we come across the two sets that we really like. But at the same time, we want to kind of add a little bit of context. So a lot of things that, if you and my team, that the first question I ask, why? Why are we doing this? Oh, because it looked cool. I'm like, I don't care, but why? What is it that we are saying? So a lot of times we really have to think through why is it important for us to show this particular data set right now, and how are we presenting it? So a lot of times with some of the more eloquent data project, we actually pair with video explainers talking about why this set of data, why is it important for you to understand it? And even the way we present it, we kind of give you the option of being a very passive user experience and also a much more engaged user experience. So part of the premise of this series is looking at job growth, job recovery between low wage, high wage, and middle wage workers. And basically with this recessions, we're saying that a lot of the high wage workers, they are losing at a faster pace than low wage workers. So when we think about the recovery, it really, the sector that's growing might be in some of the service sectors, but not in the white-collar jobs sector. So you can see, from here's looking at the different recessions and how the job recover, in 42 months. So again, if you don't want to do anything with the data, you could just press play and just watch. But if you want, you could kind of stop at any point and hover and look at, the job loss versus job gain in this particular recessions. So again, we anticipate, those data nerds that want to be like, oh, I'm going to be all know-it-all and I'm going to, look deeper into it. So we kind of, again, allow for a more passive experience for people who just want to watch, these dots, gray, red, and how one might overtake the other, to a more engaging experience where people could actually go find out the data. But we didn't just stop there. We also want to do a couple of video explainers, and that's when we partner with the reporter in the business desk to really explain what the hell are you looking at. Oh.
It's been followed by the weakest economic recovery since the Great Depression. For middle-income workers, the recovery has been virtually non-existent. Almost.
It's chrome for you.
Well, you get the point. So, and when you go through the different, time periods, so we explain, the differences between each of the different recessions, and this is one of our reporters. So again, when you think about using data, also think about your basic journalism instinct, right? Data doesn't stop at just data visualization. Data can manifest itself into, text and also video. So you can see how, as we scroll down, you don't get the bubble chart anymore, you just get a table, so that you could really look at this in a handheld device. So this is allow for more tablet experience to a full screen.
We've probably got time for one more.
Okay. So this is the Boston Marathon interactive that we did. And, and this is basically what we talk about, this smaller data set. So what we did is we heard a story about, when the time that the bomb explosion happened, a lot of people say, well, they timed it where the most runner had crossed the races and finish line. So, and somehow that didn't feel right because someone just kind of make that as an anecdote. So what we actually did is scrape the Boston Marathon database and break down the data. And this is the second iteration of the data. So what we did is look at the runners list and look at when their start time is and when they finish. And we highlighted the portion that when the bomb go off. So you can see that when the blast happened, it's actually toward the tail end, where the majority of the racer had already finished. So again, this is not a big data project, but it shed light into, some understanding of how the story happened. Because I think anytime breaking news happen, people just tend to be a little bit more chaotic, a little bit more confused, and really taking a step back and look at, well, what kind of data is available and what kind of analysis could we show? And when we did this chart, we hear back from our customers that they're glad that we did it because otherwise they wouldn't think about that point of view. They didn't think about it because they just take the anecdotal experience. But now we're using factual data to kind of debunk the anecdote. And then because of that, the stories is rewritten in a very different way.
Okay, thank you. So do you want to do it on your iPad?
Is it VGA? Yep.
Okay, great.
Oh, why is it so black? There we go. Yep. Oh, no. Here.
It's China. I'm like, it's China. They're watching you.
Okay, I'll just. All right, I'm just gonna hold this and hope that it will look okay. Do I need to do the mic? Can I speak loudly enough that?
You talk.
Oh, you hold this? Okay.
Okay.
All right. So, what a great moderator.
Yeah.
Let's give him a round of applause, everyone. All right. Woo! Okay. Multitasking. So I'm just going to give a quick demo of the Connected China app. I apologize because I know a few of you have already seen this little demo before, but hopefully it'll be better the second time or the third time. Basically, what we tried to do at Reuters was, for those of you who were under a rock for the past year and a half, there was this big leadership transition in China, once in a decade leadership transition, and we decided that we really wanted to present some information and create a new project, a new idea, a new product to kind of coincide with this very, very historical event that probably for the first time has had unprecedented attention from around the world. The story of rising China is one of the big stories of our generation. And so we thought it was a perfect time to really try to, kind of take a leap for Reuters and really push the boundaries of what we could do in terms of data visualization. Also make this a sort of a proof of concept for this idea that we had, which was that reporters every single day, we are collecting information and intelligence. Not only are we processing quantitative data and that kind of thing from governments and from companies and economic data, the other thing that we also do is we report and collect intelligence about relationships, about power, about people. And what we wanted to do was, for those of you who are not very familiar with Thomson Reuters, we are a big data company. We're data and news. We have we collect and sell lots and lots of economic data business data, data about companies. And so what we thought was, the reporting side, we file our information and tell stories in kind of traditional ways: text, video, photo. And so what we wanted to do was we wanted to take that collective intelligence from the thousands of reporters that we have around the world and develop a methodology that would allow for us to be able to give that information and that intelligence new life by storing it and structuring it in a way that could be used in the future. In addition to that, we wanted to find a new way to communicate that data and that information. So that's what Connected China is. It was kind of the first foray into this new realm. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to focus on the importance of relationships. For leadership in China, who your mentors are, who your proteges are, really affect your rise up through the party, and then as well as your legacy if you are a top leader and are retiring. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to really convey kind of the importance of those person-to-person connections, the guanxi. And so what we did was we created this visualization that allows you to take a look at all the different kinds of relationships. You can see here that we have everything from complex relationship, in-law, relative, to reportedly close to. And of course, this is kind of an interesting little kind of visualization, but really what you want to do is you want to understand why. And so what we did was, while we structured the relationship and categorized the relationships, we also then gave descriptions about the nature of these different kinds of relationships and give context to it. What we were also able to do by structuring this information, we also structured work history information. So, for example, if you look at Xi Jinping's record, you can see we have an interactive timeline about his own rise to power. All of these are structured relationships that are in a database. And what this allowed us to do was also provide a new layer of analysis. A function of Chinese governance is that there's this concept of administrative levels. They're very similar to civil service levels if you're in government. So across the party, military, and government, certain roles have been assigned as sort of a hierarchy, a ranking. And so you can actually compare across across the various pillars of governance to be able to get a sense of how people have moved up in their careers. This actually then feeds right into what we have, what we call a career comparison view. And again, this is what's great about this is that it's a combination of us structuring qualitative data using our judgment as journalists to really quantify and qualify certain types of relationships, but also to use our kind of deep knowledge of this field to really assign, to be able to understand how to best maximize quantitative data. So the fact of a person working for this organization having this position and knowing that it had a certain administrative level allows us then to be able to actually look and compare the rise of various leaders. So for example, here we have Xi Jinping, who is now the kind of not so newly minted president of China and general secretary of the party. And you can actually begin to compare his rise with other people. So you compare him to former top leaders such as his predecessor, Hu Jintao. You can see that if you read biographies of Hu Jintao, they always say, he was the first person to be promoted to this position, or the youngest person to ever be promoted to this position, and he kind of moved up. And so he was actually able to kind of get promoted quite quickly, and he made the crucial step of skipping becoming a member of the larger Politburo and just went straight to the Politburo Standing Committee at a pretty young age. Xi Jinping, you can see if you compare by age, he was he rose a little bit later in terms of his age. Now, this is all interesting from an academic standpoint, but what's really, really exciting, what's really interesting is that we can then begin to actually look at people as the rising stars and how they move up. You talk to any veteran Chinese reporter and you say, hey, who do you think is going to be, possibly going to be leader in 10 years? And they can name people off the top of their heads. And when you ask them why, they'll say, well, they were promoted at a pretty young age here. They've already been, a party secretary in 2 provinces. They have a PhD, whatever. So when you hear what they're saying, they're basing it off of their experience and their knowledge and kind of anecdotal information based on their reporting and their institutional kind of the memory they have over time and experience, right? But what we can do actually is we can begin to use our data to illustrate that in sort of a more concrete fashion. So Hu Chunhua, who is called Little Hu, is known to be a kind of Hu Jintao's protege. You can actually see when you compare him to Xi Jinping that he's actually being promoted, it has been promoted at even an earlier age. He's been considered by kind of China watchers as someone to watch and potentially a leader, a future top leader. You can compare to others like, for example, Wang Yang and, other people. And you can see how they've been moving up and how they've been proceeding. So this is, again, a way where we actually created the data set ourselves, right? We took all this information that's out there. Everything that's in Connected China is actually based off of publicly reported information, and just brought additional insight by putting it all together. And lastly, because I know I don't want to take up too much time, we have another area which is looking at institutional power. And so what we wanted to do was really help to unpack the very, very complicated kind of infrastructure of governance in China. And so what we did was we basically created an app where you can, a section where you can actually zoom in, and this is where we really get to kind of use the benefits of the iPad or a touchpad. You can actually kind of zoom in, you can double click, you can learn more about a particular organization, you can see all the different other organizations that it's tied to. You can kind of expand and go in and see all the members. Now, all of this is driven by the database, which means that we update the database every single day in terms of the types of relationships. So if someone's promoted, if someone retires, if someone is ousted, we update the database. If there's a reorganization in the government, we update the database. And what we do is then we push that update into the app. And so what this does is it allows us to, instead of having kind of a one-off infographic, we have a living app that can continuously be updated, which again, for people who are interested in this field, they know they can always come back to us and get the latest information. So.
Thank you very much. Please give everyone a round of applause.
I just want to make a mention, and this is a really great visualization, but I just want to point out that for most journalists, do not focus on what it looked like. Because I think a lot of times when we work with journalists, they say, well, could you do it in this chart? I saw this really good. That's the wrong approach. You always have to ask, what is it that you want to tell? Right? This is a very focused experience that have a story to tell. If you come and just think about, I want to make this thing look pretty, the pretty factor is going to work for like a second.
Yeah, the one we get a lot is, can I have a map? I want a map that shows, there's that, and it's not about the end result. It's about the finding what is the tool that, or the visualization that works best. Absolutely.
I don't mean to cut you guys short, but it's almost lunchtime, so we just want to get through some questions from the audience. So we've got a lot of interest. The green shirt. Yeah, you first, then I'll the other one. Sorry, that was ambiguous. Yeah, so you start. Yeah.
Hunter green.
Yeah. You can pass on the mic.
That was really interesting, and I'm also a big data geek, but I sometimes, just to play the devil's advocate, I get some questions sometimes like, what is the point? This is a kind of a bigger picture question for you, but okay, we've created this amazing, sexy infographic. What does it really serve to do? If it's just information gathering for information gathering's sake, or does it actually lead to some sort of policy change? Does it inform? What is it for? What does it lead to? I don't know if there's some practical experience or an anecdote that you may have on how this information actually played out and what was the impact of it on the ground.
So Irene, since you've done a big sexy infographic, maybe you can talk about it.
Well, I would say that that is a question that we should always be asked, right? And we should ask ourselves, because we shouldn't just vomit out data because we can. That's a terrible exercise. We should always have a purpose. And it speaks to Paul's point, which is that it's about narrative, it's about stories, it is about giving insight to something. And that's the standard that we have for stories. It's the question that an editor will ask you, whether you're doing it in print, text, photo, video, whatever. I think the point of an infographic and the point of any medium is, does it tell the story the best? Sometimes there are stories that you want to tell that you don't need actually a story. You need an infographic, you need a photo, you need a video. That's it. Or a video clip. And I think that's what we have to. And so, honestly, I think that that's a question we should embrace as data journalists. And if you can't answer that question, then it might mean that you should find another story to tell.
I can share an example from the methadone story that I mentioned previously. The drug was removed from the state's preferred medication list after the series ran, and presumably saving some lives in the process.
Let's take a quick couple more questions. Does anybody have a question for Paul? Okay, over here. Can we get the microphone up there?
Hey, I'm Sharon Chan from the Seattle Times. Of course, I like to think of ourselves as nimble and Pulitzer Prize winning rather than small. But
actually, that was actually Eric's word. He used the word small.
So I do have a question.
Relative.
Small and Pulitzer Prize winning is actually even more impressive.
And I was only saying small in relation to these guys.
So my question for Paul and other people who can jump in is, are there, I was having dinner with some friends who work at the Gates Foundation, and they're actually really trying to think about this too, right? Data visualization to help tell their story. Are there places, nonprofits or corporate places where you're looking to that are doing great, innovative things with data visualization?
Believe it or not, the Milwaukee Police Station, they had a really nice website that's very immersive. And also, a lot of the AIDS foundations, the World Health Organization, BLS, Eurostacks, which is, they're not really nonprofit, they're just government data, but they actually are doing more and more their interpretation of data, which is kind of interesting because you look at how they are interpreting the data, and then we download the data set and see how are they why are they interpreting it this way? I mean, think about when Obama kind of do his, key speeches, and then he kind of flash you these charts, and then you look at him just like, wait a minute. I'm like, this is not adjusted for inflation. Lies. No. Yeah, Bureau of Labor Statistics in the U.S.
Okay. One last question over here. Yeah. Then we'll have to wrap it up.
Sorry. Jason Gatewood from Rikyo University in Tokyo. I've got a question that has something to do. You guys briefly touched on kind of crowdsourcing in terms of using crowdsourcing for data sets. There was a university, Humboldt University in the States, that came up with a geography of hate. What they did was they took a selection of tweets and created kind of a heat map on the most derogatory tweets. And it was very statistically accurate, the way that they came up with this. What is your feeling on using social networking services as a data set for your journalism?
We actually had a discussion about that. I think we have to be really careful in terms of the sources because data is empirical, right? But you really have to question who is the one who provided data source and why are they doing it? And especially on that particular interactive is from Twitter, which is one very narrow band of hate universe. So, and you can't really just take that and say this is the be all and end all. So again, you just have to look at data a little bit more holistically.
Just a quick couple of replies from you, and then
I would say that there's a difference between. There is no data perfect universe. You will never have the perfect data set. But I think that our job is really to qualify whatever we're using in terms of data. As far as Twitter goes, it can be interesting as sort of an impressionistic kind of way, another way to kind of give some color to something that's going on. I would be very wary of using it as a source, just in general. You have to vet it the way that you'd vet anything else. But again, the important thing is understand your data set, and when you communicate it, qualify how you are using it and how you got it.
Okay, Eric, in one word, what is data journalism to you?
Awesome.
Okay, please give the guests a round of applause. Thank you.